The house in Fata Morgana is a tale of a millennium-old curse, of a tragedy that spans across generations, of the mysterious witch and a mansion housing all sorts of secrets. A record of a mystery clouded in the depth of despair, of failures time and time again, and of love that persists at the end of it all. It's a story about people that are incredibly foolish, misguided, and weak-willed, but ultimately incredibly human. And honestly, I'm gonna be straight up in saying that the house in Fata Morgana is ridiculously hard to talk about without getting to any spoilers. If you look at any review of this visual novel on Steam, you'll notice that nobody reveals any actual context for the game, and that's because the entire story is a multi-layered, interweaving plot of tragedies. I can't even reveal who the main characters of the game are because going to any level of depth with them will involve diving into the central mysteries of the story. I'm also pretty much restricted to only talking about the basic prologue, which comprises roughly a fourth of the game. Regardless, I'm gonna do my best to try and show what makes the house in Fata Morgana worth experiencing without going to any spoilers because it is that dang beautiful. It has a distinctly European flair with a gothic art style, which personally I ended up liking, but I know that may put off those who are more used to an anime look. If you can get past that, however, the house in Fata Morgana is one of the most brilliantly written visual novels I've ever experienced, both in terms of the dialogue that is written, but more importantly, in the overall narrative that is set up from beginning to end. The translators over at Manga Gamer have done an amazing job, and I tip my hat off to them for that. If you do want my deep dive into this incredible gem of a story where I don't have to be super vague on everything, I'll be releasing the spoiler follow-up to this video in a bit, link at the top right when it's out. Usually when I dive into visual novels like this, I like to give a little history of the game itself, what it represents, and give a bit more context to when it came out. Luckily for me, I guess, the house in Fata Morgana in 2013 seems to be Novec's only major release, with them releasing tons of side content over the past decade that revolve around the same characters. Pretty much every single one of these stories rely on you experiencing the main one first, with them just serving as ways for the players to hang out with the cast further like a fan disc. There is even a prequel and an after epilogue, but again, both are definitely not meant to be played until you've already gone through the main plot, as they are chock full of spoilers to what is already an incredibly tight package. The setup to the house in Fata Morgana goes something like this. Our main character wakes up in a decrepit mansion. A woman who only refers to herself as the maid guides our main character, informing them that they are the master of the house. However, our main character has absolutely no memories, nor even any form really. In order to retrieve those memories, the maid invites the new master to explore the house, and to experience the numerous tragedies that has befallen all the previous residents. At the end of all those stories, perhaps the master will discover what role they themselves play in this story, and uncover what lies underneath centuries of misery. At its core, the main setup to the house in Fata Morgana is a mystery story. You're given the explicit duty to uncover just who exactly is the main character, and who is the master of the mansion. That, however, only scratches the surface of what you are told to uncover, with there being so many other underlying mysteries, such as who is the white-haired girl that is present in every single one of these stories, who is the so-called witch of the mansion that is passed down in legend through each one of these generations, what is this mansion itself, who is the maid, and why do these inhabitants of this mansion always fall into such tragedy. The house in Fata Morgana is an expert at slowly unraveling its multi-generational plot. What's amazing about the story is just how well it takes its time with each point it wants to make. The best part is that every time a big revelation happens, my immediate reaction is, of course, that's what all those things I noticed earlier meant, rather than, huh, where'd this crap come from? While the players are preoccupied with trying to figure out how every immediate story is gonna end, the game is interweaving a ton of other things with hidden meanings that the player might notice but not fully understand till much later. To be entirely frank, I think how the first 4 initial stories develop are pretty predictable, based on the fact that we were already given the setup that every one of these stories end in some sort of tragedy. But that's because they are built that way on purpose. What's important about these stories aren't necessarily how every single one of them ends, but how they got to that end, and what they showed along the way. With that said, while I think the first 4 stories are incredibly vital to how the story turns out, that doesn't change the fact that it definitely isn't the best the game has to offer. By the end of the third door, my opinions of the story were that it was solid, but not amazing. It was only after getting beyond this initial setup that I truly became enraptured by everything the game had to offer, and was glued to my screen the rest of the way through. The greatest strength of the house in Fata Morgana is perspective, and how it utilizes that concept. I wouldn't even mention this normally because a lot of visual novels use the idea of a unreliable narrator for ultimately a big gotcha moment at the very end, making this a big spoiler of sorts, but the House of Fata Morgana makes it a central theme through great writing. It's not merely meant to reveal some big twist, but rather it serves as a core narrative function constantly throughout the entire plot. It shows both an ugliness that we could never see looking from one perspective, of pain hidden up until perhaps it's too late, but also of kindness that lies underneath it all. The relationship between the main characters is really endearing. Many visual novels, or any story really, likes to depict a romantic ideal of a love that endures for generations, and it's usually hella cheesy. Not that it's bad to see, and even when done poorly, it still gives you a cute little "aww" moment. What makes the House in Fata Morgana work so well though is that emotionally I really buy it. How much pain and suffering the characters go through, and how they stand up in the face of it all is, to put it as plain as possible, pretty goddamn beautiful. I'd love to go in depth about all of this, but that will be saved for the spoiler section. Since I'm sticking with more surface level elements here, let's talk about the art and music, because that is probably one of the biggest things that will either entice the player into playing, or perhaps scare them a little. The House in Fata Morgana veers away from the more mainstream anime style used in most visual novels, instead opting for a much more gothic and European look. It's deliberately haunting and eerie, and while personally it's one of the things that got me interested in playing it in the first place, I know some people will be kind of put off by it. I think the gothic look suits the game incredibly, and considering the entirety of the game takes place in Europe, fits the game a lot better. If you are one of those that are put off by the art style, I think once you start playing it and get past the second story, you'll come to appreciate it a lot more. The first story is deliberately the most contrasting and weird, while also somehow being the weakest story, and it only gets better from there. Art style isn't the only thing that separates the House in Fata Morgana from other visual novels, it's also the music. The music is very different from what we come to expect from a Japanese visual novel. The soundtrack for the game is exceedingly eclectic. There is a wonderful mix of songs, ranging from ballads, old folklore songs, and jazz, all the way to creepy religious sermons. There are both incredibly bright and whimsical songs that act as a prelude to what's about to happen, as well as haunting melodies that will strike fear into your very soul. Out of the 68 songs that make up the entirety of the soundtrack, 24 of them are vocal songs, and every single one of them are sung in pure Latin, I believe. Which is insane for a Japanese visual novel. Since I don't understand Latin in any way, I think all of it sounds like it's sung really well, although I have no real way of knowing. It's a ridiculously stacked soundtrack that can only be described as hauntingly beautiful. Would I listen to any of it outside of this game? Aside from a few particular songs, probably not. But do I think it's an incredible soundtrack? Yes, 100%. In fact, I think in terms of how fitting this soundtrack is to the game and how it serves to uplift every single moment in the story, it is one of the best scores I've ever seen. Even though all the stories take place through multiple generations, the soundtrack manages to sound appropriate for each one of them. I don't think it's the kind of soundtrack that you can just download it on its own and appreciate it for what it is, but it is a soundtrack where after finishing the game, when you play one of the main themes, it will give you goosebumps as you remember that particular scene. I know that I've been intentionally vague throughout this entire thing, but that's because I really do recommend playing the House in Fata Morgana. Going into too much detail would take away from what is already an incredible story that takes its time to slowly craft a setting and narrative that will take your heart away. I wanted to at least introduce some of the main features that I thought the story did incredibly well, because I know that people need that extra push to get them to commit to a story that is not short by any means. Especially when that particular visual novel is so different from what they are normally used to playing. I know that because I've had this story sitting in my backlog for over 5 years now. Believe me when I say that it's entirely worth your time. It's not the longest one I've played, but it is one of the most powerful stories. Of course, considering how much I love the House in Fata Morgana, I'm going to have a spoiler look at my opinion about the entire game coming out in a bit. So if you've played the House in Fata Morgana, or you just want to hear my thoughts about it, feel free to check that out when it comes out, link at the end. I have so much I want to talk about that I withheld from doing so because spoilers. If you got any questions or want to talk about the game without going to spoilers, feel free to put them down in the comments below. All the support stuff is in the same place as always. Like, subscribe, notifications, and I'll see you later. Till next time.